Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing well. I was testing out applying watercolor on 80-pound drawing paper. I wanted to see if I could create transparent washy looking pattern paper to add to my stash. I'd rather use 80-pound paper than heavier, more expensive watercolor paper for collaging. I thought it might be of interest to some of you to watch me create more of these papers, so I decided to film the process. These are the papers that I've made so far. Most of them turned out as I had hoped, except for this paper. When I paint a solid ground on watercolor paper, I like to brush a light wash of clean water over the whole surface first. This helps to blend the watercolor smoothly on the paper. That's what I did on this paper, and you can see what happened. There's small watermarks over the whole surface. The watermarks do add some texture, which is an element of design, but I'd rather not have them. I'm omitting this step going forward. Other supplies besides the 80-pound drawing paper are various brushes. Also, I brought out what I would consider good quality watercolors. There's the Kuretake Gansai Tambai individual pans and 2 Coors watercolor sets, earth tones, and high chroma, and that's it. So let's get started. I want to point out that the names of the watercolors I'm using will be noted at the bottom of the frame. Also, this section will be a mix of narration and music. As I mentioned previously, I decided not to add a layer of water on the paper before I started painting the ground. I found that omitting that step helped to avoid small watermarks. When I'm painting a watercolor ground, I don't want a solid color. I want a transparent washy look. Off camera, I painted a few more papers to use for this painting session. Also, I used papers without a painted ground. For this first paper, I'm creating a swirl pattern that is compact. Since I'm using this paper for collaging, I want to make sure that I get a good portion of the pattern in a piece that it's cut or torn. I'm doing the same thing with the teal swirls. To add variety, I'm using a smaller size brush for the teal swirl than I did for the orange swirl. I'm creating expressive circles for this next paper. This is a good example of why I wanted to create watercolor ephemera. You can see the washy look of these circles. I even like how some of the circles are not completely filled in. I love the contrast between the red washy ground and the blue expressive circles. Next up, I'm using a handmade stencil to add an all-over pattern. When applying watercolor with a stencil, keep the consistency of the watercolor thick so it won't bleed under the stencil. I want the shape of the stencil image to be legible, but it doesn't necessarily need to be perfect. You'll see me keep adding small amounts of water to reconstitute the watercolor. I'd rather do this step over and over than to add too much water all at once and the consistency of the water to be too thin. I'll be using 3 colors, so I'm adding each color around the page. I want the colors to be balanced as much as possible. This paper developed watermarks. The paper got too wet when I applied two different colors to the ground. I'm adding splatters on top to camouflage or enhance the watermarks. I'm using the same colors as I used to paint the ground for the splatters. This is a simple design, but my stash needs some of these types of papers. I tend to create heavily patterned papers. It's good to have some variety in your stash. Similar to the previous paper, this one will have a simple monochromatic design. I want to point out these areas. It's another example of why I wanted to add watercolor paper to my stash. I really love the watercolor marks that have been made. It adds an interesting detail to the paper. It's been quite a while since I applied watercolors with stamps. Similar to using watercolor with stencils, the watercolor should have a thicker consistency. The stamped image will be a bit uneven, which I like, but you'll get a cleaner image if the watercolor is thicker rather than thinner. Also, you may only get one good stamped image before you have to reapply the watercolor. I hope you found this painting session to be interesting and helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this video. I hope to see you again. Take care.